most of our work with the United States State Department and identifying emerging leaders around the world to try to create networks with their American counterparts. But we also work extensively with the private sector, and one of our key partners is Corteva, the largest agri-science company in the world. And what we're going to do is I'm going to invite Karis Gutter first to introduce Congresswoman Castor, and then bring in Joe Dunn of the European Parliament Liaison Office here in Washington to introduce Representative Canfin. So just a word on Karis. He has been leading policy issues in this agricultural arena, environmental arena for many years, and served as Deputy Undersecretary at the Department of Agriculture, and is also a Marine, and I guess once a Marine, always a Marine. So welcome, Karis, and maybe you could share a word or two about Corteva and then introduce our honored guests.
Good morning, and Semper Fi, Stuart. I appreciate the warm introduction.
I was a Navy guy, but I'm always jealous of the uniform.
Thanks. Good morning. My name is Karis Gutter. I lead North America Government Industry Affairs for Corteva Agriscience, a proud sponsor of the Meridian's Corporate Council, bringing these types of programs routinely. I'm especially pleased this morning to introduce our distinguished speaker today, because of the value my company, Corteva Agriscience, places on policy and thought leadership that the U.S. and the European Union can bring to the global challenges of climate, trade, and sustainable food systems. Corteva is the only major agriscience company completely dedicated to agriculture. Combining the strengths of the former DuPont Pioneer, DuPont Crop Protection, and Dow AgriSciences, we have over 2 centuries of experience in improving agriculture around the world. This is especially true in the United States and the European Union, where we're bringing innovative solutions to farmers to improve soil health, water quality, while reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But enough about Corteva, and on to introducing our speaker. In the 116th Congress, Congresswoman Kathy Castor was appointed to the chair of the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, where she's leading her colleagues in bold action to confront the climate crisis. She also serves on the very powerful House Energy and Commerce Committee, which has responsibilities over consumer protection, public health, air quality, and environmental health. Most importantly, though, Kathy Castor represents the championship Tampa Bay area, home to the Super Bowl winning Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Stanley Cup winning Tampa Bay Lightning. Congresswoman Castor is Tampa Bay's voice in the U.S. Congress. She was originally elected in 2006 and is the first woman to represent Hillsborough and Pinellas counties in the U.S. Congress. She's also previously served as a Hillsborough County Commissioner and chair of the Hillsborough County Environmental Protection Commission. It's my pleasure to welcome and introduce Congresswoman Kathy Castor.
Welcome, Congresswoman Castor. It's now my pleasure to introduce Joe Dunn, who is the head of the European Parliament's Liaison Office in Washington since 2019, otherwise known as EPLO, a new acronym I've gotten to appreciate. Joe has a lot of experience looking at policy issues that relate to Europe and the United States, served as a fellow at the German Marshall Fund, as well as really was the librarian, what we would call the Librarian of Congress for the European Parliament, where he oversaw all the research, library and constituent services and information services for the Parliament. So welcome, Joe, and I'll leave it to you to introduce our other distinguished speaker.
Thank you, Ambassador Halliday. It's a great privilege for me indeed, as the Director of the European Parliament Liaison Office in Washington, to introduce the Chair of our Environment Committee, Mr. Pascal Canfin. I think it's an important day today. It's important to mark the return of the US to the Paris Agreement. I think it's important to underline the importance of or the relevance of parliamentary dialogue. So it's great that we have the two main actors, if that's the word, in the parliamentary dialogue on the climate crisis. Mr. Canfin comes as chair of a very important committee. I think it's worth stressing for our business and diplomatic stakeholders how central the Environment Committee has been to the growth and development of the European Parliament, and especially in bringing about awareness of climate problems and environmental problems, and delivering the legislation for European citizens. In the early days, the recognition was that pollution is no respecter of national borders. So the attempt was to solve the problem at a European level. In the last decade, the awareness raising has been on climate change and how a global problem needs global solutions. So in this context, the dialogue between the European Union and the United States is absolutely key. So I'm certainly looking forward to a very interesting discussion. I think Mr. Canfin is the best representative we could have for the Parliament. He has a distinguished record as a parliamentarian and as a champion for the environment. So hand over to the parliamentary speakers. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you very much for this important collaboration between the European Parliament and Meridian.
Thank you, Joe, and welcome. We look forward to the discussion. Then we'll have an opportunity for some Q&A and a little bit of interaction. But I think we're going to hear from Congresswoman Castor first, and then Representative Canfin. I think we need the video stream for the Congresswoman. I'm sure she is there. She is.
There are. Well, good day, everyone. Thank you, Karis, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you for recognizing that Tampa is the city of champions. I'm coming to you from Tampa, Florida today. Thank you, Ambassador Holliday, for convening us. I'm grateful to Meridian International and the European Parliament for bringing us together, especially with my good friend across the Atlantic, Chair Canfin. I'm especially thrilled that we can come together on this day as we mark the United States' official return to the Paris Climate Accords. It's been 30 days since President Biden took office. On that very first day, he announced that the U.S. would rejoin the Paris Agreement. So he's made good on his promise to renew America's commitments to the global community. And I think we trust in President Biden that he knows that we all have to work together to solve the climate crisis. President Biden has assembled an outstanding, experienced team, including former Secretary of State John Kerry as his international climate envoy, and Secretary Kerry has already begun the important work of outreach. And he has said that America returns with humility, but with incredible focus, that our time is short. We know with President Biden's leadership and this terrific team he's put together that they are already focused on how we reduce emissions. We've got to follow the science and re-engage with the entire world to advance solutions. We know what is at stake. The IPCC report has made that plain. We must achieve net zero emissions no later than 2050, which means we have to get going right away in order to give future generations a fighting chance. And we have to make sure that every nation, including the vulnerable, have the tools they need. So this is truly a global effort. In America, for those of you who aren't in the United States right now, you may or may not be aware that In the state of Texas, they are grappling with an energy crisis and a humanitarian crisis. This is in a state that has prided itself on being the energy capital of the United States, of the world, but I think it demonstrates that no one is immune from the colossal, unpredictable impacts of the climate crisis. I mean, add that on top of extraordinary wildfires out west that are growing more deadly every year. And 2020 set records for the number of hurricanes, Atlantic hurricanes. And here on the Gulf Coast, I watched them intensify more quickly in Gulf waters. In fact, in my home city of Tampa, we just suffered through the hottest year on record and set an all-time record for extreme heat. So again and again, vulnerable families and folks on the front lines are the most impacted. So as we talk about solutions, I think we have to, in addition to be grounded in the science, we understand that there is a moral imperative to act now and to protect our neighbors and to protect future generations. But we can do it. We intend to solve the climate crisis with that can-do spirit in partnership with businesses across the globe, especially in the United States and in the EU, innovation, coordination among nations, and a transition to cleaner sources of energy. And that's why in the US Congress, Speaker Nancy Pelosi asked me to lead a select committee on the climate crisis. And 2 years ago, we were charged with a all-encompassing plan of action. And we embarked on a broad period of outreach and asked business leaders, farmers, youth activists, scientists, entrepreneurs, folks in every sector of the economy to come forward and propose solutions that the Congress could enact into law. All of those proposals, once we synthesized all of that information, last summer we issued what has been described as the most detailed and impactful set of policy recommendations for the US government that's ever been compiled. This is our Solving the Climate Crisis Action Plan. And fortunately, an independent think tank, Energy Innovation, said if we enacted these policy recommendations in the United States, we would get to about 90% of where we need to be towards our 2050 goals. Fortunately, on the heels of our report last summer, the Congress did act. We enacted some important bipartisan provisions. We agreed to scale down hydrofluorocarbons. We have invested additional monies in clean energy R&D, but we're just getting started. And now with a partner in the White House, a knowledgeable expert team in President Joe Biden, the International Climate Envoy, John Kerry, bringing back the EPA administrator under President Obama and Gina McCarthy to be our national climate advisor. They understand this is a whole of government requirement if we are going to meet our challenges moving forward. So we will begin to work in, after we pass our American Rescue Plan that is front and center, crushing COVID, making sure families have the economic stabilizers that they need, making sure our children can go back to school safely. After we enact our American Rescue Plan, which is an economic stabilizer, we intend to turn the page and begin to build back better. That's President Biden's proposal that will be a transportation and infrastructure package. I imagine just as the EU has adopted a Green Deal that is all encompassing, here in the US, we're going to hammer out the proposals for our Build Back Better package that will be the cleanest and greenest set of proposals ever enacted by the United States Congress. We're very fortunate now to have partners across the Atlantic who can help devise these solutions. This is a smart policy to bounce back economically from turmoil and job losses suffered during COVID-19. It will provide a stronger foundation for our economy going forward. but we have to enlist your help to turn this plan into a reality. If we follow through on this action, I'm confident that we'll put America on a path to net zero by 2050, and then help with technology transfer to vulnerable and developing nations across the world. On the international front, I have to say, everyone is so enthused to have President Biden at the helm. We look forward to additional conversations across the Atlantic as we all come together for solutions. So I'm excited about today's conversation. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Congressman. Welcome, Representative Canfin. Hope you're doing well and staying safe. And the floor is yours now, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning for you. This is already the afternoon in Brussels, where I've been working all the day on the climate crisis, but also on the COVID crisis, because I'm the chair of the Environment and Public Health Committee. So you can imagine that the two crises at the same time, it's quite heavy. I'm very, very happy to be with you today, because as it was said by Cathy Castor, it's obviously one of a unique opportunity we have as politicians to make the difference. And just welcome back. Welcome back. We need you, and we expect you. And I hope you will be a very cooperative, ambitious player in the game we are all now in, and pursuing the very same objective recalled by Cathy Castor, meaning the climate neutrality in 2050. As it was said earlier, we are embarked into a new journey in Europe, which is called the Green Deal. So I know that the Green Deal terminology might be more, I would say, polarized in the US, but in the EU, it's completely mainstream. It is used by everybody on any side of the political spectrum to define the journey we are in, moving from the situation we are in terms of way of life, in terms of production pattern, in terms of energy mix, transportation pattern, and so on, up to the climate neutrality for the whole economy in 3 decades. Because when we say 2050, it might be seen as long term. 3 decades, it's another story, because almost everything we invest in now, housing, transport infrastructure, energy infrastructure, power plant, whatever, will be still in place or is planned to be in place in 3 decades time. So the right decisions have to be made now. That's why in the context of the Green Deal, we are reviewing, changing 50 laws at the same time, 50. Whether we talk about green finance, renewable energies, energy efficiency of the housing sector, the cars standards, the carbon price, the trade policies, and so on, we are reviewing everything at the same time from now on up to the next 18 months. Everything is and will be on the table over the next 18 months, because when you change 50 laws at the same time, well, that's really a systemic change. And when you connect the dots, you have a real transformative ambition. The second dimension of the Green Deal, beyond the legislative process we are in, and I will spot just a very few of the 50 texts, and I will answer maybe questions later on for more detailed proposal, is the recovery plan. You are as well in the US embarked into a new recovery plan negotiation. At European level, we have done it, and even if it's a bit smaller in scale compared to yours, from a European perspective, it's an historical achievement, because, as you might know, so far there was no European capacity to invest as a European Union. And we have created this capacity up to 700 billion euros. So that now, over the next 2 years, we are collectively invest this 700 billion euros for key priorities. And within these priorities, the very first priority, with 37% of the total, so almost 40% of the total of this amount of money, is dedicated to climate investment. Whether we talk about housing renovation, transportation, bonuses for electric cars, and so on and so on and so on, it's dedicated for climate action. With the same ground, the same methodology, the same pattern, so that we can have, at the scale of the continent, a real push and a real accelerator of the transition with this huge pot of money. So that's clearly probably that's at least at the European level, that's by far the largest investment wave in the green field, in the climate action we have ever had. And on top of that, we have another dimension in this recovery plan, which is what we call the do not harm principle. Do not harm, meaning that nothing financed by this plan can be harmful for the climate change. So for almost 40% will be positively acting for climate, and for the rest, it has to be neutral. So we make sure that we align the recovery package with the Paris Agreement, and we change the investment pattern of the EU with this investment plan. Now, for a few minutes, just to tell you maybe 2 examples that could be of interest for you of what we have been doing and what we are in the process of doing for the next months. The first one is the reform of the carbon market. That's a debate in the US I'm aware of. I don't know what will be the end of that, but in the EU, in June, we will propose a profound reform of the carbon market that will lead us very short term to a carbon price which is assessed around and expected around 50 euros, so $60 per ton of CO2. Today, and it was for the first time last week, we are now at 40 euros, so around $50, which starts to be quite significant. And that's why one key element of this, this reform is also to have a level playing field, because we cannot impose to our industries, whether we talk about the car industry, the fertilizer industry, the chemical industry, the cement, and so on and so on. We cannot impose them such a high price, $60, if they can't compete at the end because of this burden, I would say, and then they are put out of the market because they would compete with a zero carbon price coming from the rest of the world through imports. So that's why we will introduce as well, at the very same time, June 21, a legislative proposal for a carbon border adjustment mechanism. That will be the first time we actually go, I would say one public authority go into that space. And I wanted to share that with you because, of course, that will be an impact on the U.S. EU relationship. And we will have to handle that in a cooperative manner, but making sure that it's first WTO compliant. That's a red line for us. We do not want to enter into a trade war. I repeat that. We do not want to enter into a trade war. What we want is to use the WTO rules to have a level playing field for our industries, because otherwise that would be completely detrimental for us to go down that line. And at the end of the day, it will be detrimental for climate action. So that's the mindset we are in. And of course, we have already started to discuss with key players like India, China, Turkey, and others to make sure that there is a good understanding of what we plan to do. The last part, the last remark as a conclusion will be that, of course, we really want to build, as Cathy Castor said, a transatlantic alliance, because we amount for 45% of the global GDP, the two of us. So if we manage to do it right, almost half of the economy will do it right. So that's why I really cherish the idea of a transatlantic partnership for climate neutrality, and I will initiate things like that, and hopefully together with Cathy Castor, we can bring businesses on that, progressive businesses, to build this joint agenda to make sure that we make the most of this unique historical opportunity we are in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pascal. I wanted to ask you all a sort of a basic question, and then we're going to hear from some of our colleagues as well who have a few questions. And if you do have a question for us in the audience, you can use the Q&A button. One of the critiques, and I know you're probably tired of getting this question, but one of the critiques of climate policy is that there's a potential to kind of hamper job growth, and that it's going to kind of hamper innovation or slow down economic growth. And this has been, this came up in our presidential debates. It's come up, I'm sure, in Europe as well. But what could you say to people who are concerned about that aspect? Congresswoman first, and then Pascal.
Well, I think we do have to be cognizant of changes in the workforce over time, and that's why working hand in hand with President Biden and his administration, he has established from the very get-go that we're not going to leave workers behind. In fact, we value the workers, energy workers of the past who have helped build our nation and have helped power our GDP and innovation over time. We actually see that the transition to clean energy as an enormous opportunity for job creation. President Biden has made the direct connection between clean energy and climate action and putting Americans back to work, and that's going to be central to the Build Back Better plan. He's aiming to create 1 million jobs in the auto industry. I think everyone was quite impressed with the General Motors announcement on their commitment to electric vehicles, and we view that as a global competitiveness issue. We want to build those cars in America and sell them across the Atlantic and across the globe. We're going to have to strengthen our supply chains. That also means a very important investment in communities that say in the industrial Midwest, that have seen jobs move overseas over time. We intend to embark on an industrial policy that invests in those workers in those communities. President Biden and the majority of the Congress believes when we're talking about jobs in clean energy and in developing climate solutions, that needs to go hand in hand with a commitment to labor and labor unions. So just a few days ago, President Biden met with the unions across the board, and everything we do will be tied to the ability to join a union and find a good paying job. We know that in a lot of clean energy sectors that has not been the case, but if we are going to ensure that everyone has a tangible, positive benefit from tackling climate, that has got to be central to what we do. The president has also said that we could create 1 million jobs in energy efficiency. We know that we need to invest in our buildings, and he's going to lead by example across the federal real estate paradigm and in the vehicle paradigm, and begin to clean up and retrofit those sectors. There are hundreds of thousands of jobs as well in protecting our natural resources. We estimate we could create 250,000 jobs just plugging abandoned wells in places like Texas and reclaiming abandoned coal mines across the coal states. This is crucial. If we're going to invest in resilience and clean energy, we want to make sure it's a win-win for the economy and communities across America. Take our electric grid, for example, and this crisis in Texas. We're going to have to invest in greater resiliency in our electric grid. Those are good paying jobs, whether you're engineers or you're working on the line. We see this as the challenge, particularly in this decade. And I think when we get to the Build Back Better plan in the coming months, you will see enormous investments in creating the modern grid to connect renewables to that grid and making it more resilient so we don't see these energy crisis, humanitarian crisis like we do in Texas.
Our thoughts and prayers are with the people of Texas today as well. So, Pascal, your thoughts on jobs versus climate protection?
Yeah, I mean, we have now plenty of studies and good cases that demonstrate that when you go greener in a sector or an industry, whether we talk about transportation or housing or energy, you create at the end of the day more jobs than you destroy them. But you're right, for some communities, for some territories, there will be detrimental effects. So we are not concerned about the macro effects. On the contrary, we consider that the Green Deal is a new growth strategy for the EU. That's the core of the engine. But we acknowledge at the same time that we need to address some specific negative effects. That's why we have a joint pot, I would say, to have a solidarity action, what we call the Just Transition Fund, which is dedicated to the regions in the EU, like in Poland or some regions in Germany, for instance, that will be negatively affected by the transition. But when it comes to innovation, you know, there is no question anymore. I mean, when you look at the new innovation wave, it's about carbon neutrality. And if I put the context of the U.S. EU relationship and the geopolitics behind, you won the U.S. and China, you won the digital revolution. Well, to be honest, we try to compete still, but we are lagging behind. I mean, that's obvious. So from an EU perspective, the zero carbon industrial revolution is the only one we can win. That's why we got organized to win.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Pascal. I'd like to invite Karis back to ask a question. Welcome back, Karis.
Yes, your joint presence here on this issue is encouraging. It's an encouraging sign of your willingness to look together for solutions on climate change and other environmental challenges are facing our societies. Climate change and the environment are, of course, front page news around the world. At the same time, we also recognize the importance of the pillars of sustainability, namely social and economic sustainability. As you guide climate change work of your respective countries, how can we ensure a balance in the more national climate agendas for your countries while recognizing the local decision makers in your geographies? They're oftentimes the best placed to help define sustainability in light of their local environments and needs, for example, agriculture. To both of you.
Well, it's clear here in the United States that the federal government must be a better partner to communities back home. And here's some good news. After the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, we issued our major Solving the Climate Crisis report last summer. What followed on the heels was the major transportation infrastructure bill in the House of Representatives called the Moving Forward Act. If you examine that act, which is likely to be the basis of the Biden Build Back Better plan, you will see enormous investments and partnerships with local communities back home. First, built upon a pillar of environmental justice so that every investment and decision made at the federal level has is built upon that foundation, the consultation, investment, additional intent in consultation, but also communities across the country, their infrastructure is crumbling. We haven't had a major infrastructure investment from the federal government on the scale of the Recovery Act during President Obama, that puts climate front and center. So that means, for example, here in the state of Florida, if we have a major an extreme rain event or a tropical storm or hurricane, often our wastewater systems are overwhelmed. These local communities, they need help in modernizing water systems, stormwater, wastewater systems. We know that there are enormous financial risks right now, enormous cost if we do not act. And another example are transit systems, really hit hard by the pandemic. They don't have the ridership right now, but they've got to upgrade their systems and be ready to bounce back. We are going to propose significant new investments in our transit systems, not just to continue the way they were, but to harden them, make them more resilient, and expand them over time. That will be a very important piece of it. Our supply chains, COVID has laid bare that, gosh, we're not even manufacturing medical supplies here anymore in the case of an emergency. The same goes for our industrial base, again, in component parts for the new electric vehicles and trucks, or building the wind turbines off the coast and in the Midwest. These types of enormous investments will be made, I predict, but we've got to do that in partnership with the private sector here. We need your help as well. And I think the European Union and the Green Deal provides some terrific insight, examples about how we can move forward in the United States as well.
Great. Anything to add, Pascal, or should we go to the next?
No, not on that one. And I'm very much in line with what Castor said. So if you have an ultimate question to me, because I will have to leave.
Yeah. So we'll have one more question for both of you, and then we'll keep going with the Congresswoman. I'm going to ask Dan Sheehan, who's Senior Vice President, Bank of America, a good friend of Meridian. Hey, Dan.
Hey, good morning, Mr. Ambassador.
Looks like you got a little snow in the background there.
Yeah, more ice than snow. But anyway, thanks for the opportunity, Mr. Ambassador, to participate. And good morning, Congresswoman.
Morning.
Good afternoon, Mr. Canfin. Thanks for participating. I got a bit of a toughie question for you. I'll let you know in advance, but it's just something I think we need to think about. So I handle international relations policy for Bank of America, and we're a global bank. And to get to where we want to be as a green planet, it's going to take a public-private partnership. There'll be public money, there'll be private investment, and that's where Bank of America comes in. And so what we're seeing around the world is a number of initiatives to have disclosure requirements for companies that claim to be green, that claim to be investing in green companies, green funds, stock funds, that type of thing. And our friends in the EU are way out ahead of the rest of the world on this. So we're seeing some areas where there are disclosure and metric and definitional requirements, and some that are discretionary. And so global companies are concerned about market fragmentation, where the legal requirements in one country may be different to another. So it's great that we have two internationalists here participating. So how in the future can we get, do you think, to a global set of standards as to what is green, metrics, definitional standards that will help global companies do this on a worldwide basis? Thank you.
Thanks. And maybe I'll go to Pascal first, since he's got to run, and then we.
Thank you, if you don't mind, Kathy. So, that's a very important question, of course. And we have adopted, it was in December 2019, what we call the taxonomy regulation, precisely to define what is green or not, what is helping the transition, even if it's not green, there is a positive impact for transitioning, and what is harmful. And now we have an integrated grammar for the EU market. And that was the fragmentation you were mentioning from the European perspective, was not even the global fragmentation, it was the European fragmentation. If you are a Swedish investor and you want to invest in Spain or in Italy, then you don't call it green the same thing. So you can't report, you can't have a smooth, I would say, financial market. We solve this problem, and we are probably the first continent having this grammar to define what is green, what is transitioning, what is harmful. And we apply it to all the funds that want to invest in the European market. So whatever you are, US headquartered or Japan headquartered or EU headquartered, you will have to comply with this in your reporting. And we, in April, 21st of April to be very precise, there will be the new legislative proposal for what we call the non-financial reporting directive, precisely to define exactly what will be the requirements for non-financial reporting. For instance, alignment with the TCFD, so alignment with forward-looking scenarios for climate action, so that we know in which companies, in which corporates you invest in terms of climate strategy, alignment or non-alignment with the greening of the economy. So we are designing it. And of course, the next step for us will be to start discussing with you and the others how to we can make the most of that to discuss for future global standards.
That's great.
Thank you.
By the way, I think the important point that Dan was raising is how do we get, a global standard versus just pockets here and there. And it sounds like you're moving in that direction. But Pascal, thank you. I did want to let you know that our last questioner, you won't be here, but a great corporate partner of ours, 3M, will be joining. And I know that they do a lot in Europe. So we may follow up with you later, but thanks for joining us. And I guess, Kathy, Congresswoman Castor, maybe you could address the global, the standards question on the financial piece, if you have a view on that.
Yeah, and I really appreciate your question, Dan, because the United States of America is behind in incorporating climate risk into our financial system. But again, there's good news with the election of President Biden. He's directed his entire team to ensure that we understand the risk to our financial system and to our communities across the country. So, Secretary Janet Yellen is already directing the Treasury Department to begin to do that across all of their agencies. And I'd point you to the remarks yesterday of Lyle Brainerd of the Federal Reserve, where she made very impactful comments about how the central bank has to incorporate climate considerations into operations and oversight of our entire financial system. And to that point, on my climate committee, Congressman Sean Caston from Illinois, who has a background in finance and clean energy, he has probably the leading bill in the Congress. He sits on the Financial Services Committee, and I think we're going to look to move Representative Caston's bill. But we've got to do this. I mean, it's important to the entire financial system, but here on the ground, I can tell you, in a state like Florida, we face enormous risks, and the costs are growing day after day. And we're talking about just, if you're the average consumer, your property insurance is going up, your flood insurance is going up, if we're going to have these longer, hotter summers, your AC bills. Last year was one of the most expensive disaster years on record. Probably the year of Hurricane Maria and Irma was more expensive, but almost $100 billion in outlays. So we've got to invest on the front end to be more resilient, and we could use your help and insight.
Thank you,
much, Dan. And now for our last question, I'd like to invite Brittany Masaloso from 3M, our good friend. Hey, how are you?
Hi, Stuart. Good to see you, Congresswoman. Thank you so much for taking your time today. We very much appreciate this very informative session. 3M is an advanced material science company. You know, we're committed to making innovative solutions, whether it's for people, communities, government, and of course, global challenges such as climate change. We acknowledge the dire need for the interventions and the legislation and regulation to follow. Just this week, 3M had a big announcement. I'm not sure if you saw it, but we announced that we're committing $1 billion over the next 20 years to our sustainability goals. These include water reduction goals, water quality goals, and then of course, our paramount goal to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. So we're excited to see this transatlantic cooperation. My question for you is, with the long list of cooperation and challenges we're facing, the long list of smart science-based legislation and regulation that's needed, what do you see as being first up on the docket? And a second to follow up, how can industry be most supportive of that agenda?
Well, Brittany, thank you very much. And congratulations on 3M's announcement on sustainability. It's, you know, we're very fortunate as President Biden comes in that we're not starting from scratch. It has been the private sector, many in business, that have carried our water during the 4 years of the Trump administration as they backed out of international cooperation and our climate goals. So the private sector has been ramping up its climate action, local communities, states, but there is no substitute for federal leadership and federal investment. So I think it's looking forward now, the conversations are happening across the country and on Capitol Hill and at the White House on exactly what the Build Back Better package needs to contain. It will be a fundamental reset for a stronger foundation for the American economy. You all know the importance of supply chains, and we really want the clean energy future to be tangible for everyday Americans in communities all across the country. And that's different in Florida as it is in Ohio, as it is in Washington State. So we're going to need that kind of innovation, but look for significant investments in research and development, particularly in clean energy, in battery storage, we've talked about building the macro grid, making our grid more resilient. We've got to do more on building materials. There'll be a lot of R&D investment there. Our food systems, we want to empower farmers to sequester carbon and focus on soil health, and then encourage communities not to waste food. We're at a crossroads here where we have so many children in poverty, so many families without adequate nutrition, and yet we have an abundance of food. We can do much better in efficiency in the food system too. So this is a heavy lift, but I'm optimistic today as we rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. We have a fantastic partner across the ocean in the EU and the countries there. We have an engaged private sector, and we have the American people behind us who know that clean energy is cheaper and that we can reset on a stronger foundation for the economic well-being of our families.
Thanks. And I forgot to mention that Brittany was also a senior aide to then Vice President Biden. And President Biden. So I think
so. You know the Recovery Act.
She knows
Yes,
knows a few people in the White House. But Brittany, thanks very much, and thanks to 3M.
Thank you.
But by the way, I couldn't resist looking at your background to think Senator Cruz would have been so much better off just flying to Tampa instead of Cancun.
That's okay. He needs to stay in Texas and help Texans. It's just a colossal failure. And in our climate crisis action plan out of the select committee, we had a number of recommendations on making our grid more resilient. And I intend to, working with my Texas colleagues, make sure they are enacted into law.
Well, my family is originally from Texas. I can tell you Texas is always tried to do things its own way, and it's worked in a lot of cases. But obviously, this crisis is something which needs to evaluate, how we can strengthen that resiliency in Texas to keep people warm and it's I hope that the situation improves. But I wanted to thank you for your insight and your leadership, Congresswoman. And I also wanted to thank the European Parliament Office in Washington for EPLO for facilitating today's discussion. And we hope to continue. And we think that really, as was mentioned before, the United States and Europe have the potential to really be leaders and partners in this. And I look forward to Meridian playing a role in that. So stay safe. Thank you again. And we appreciate all of our audience today joining us for this timely discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.